Welcome to the Asking Why podcast. I'm your host, Clint Davis, and today we have Josh Pettigrew with us, and I'm super excited to have this conversation and have you on, man. Welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah.
Nice.
So Josh is a biblical counselor at Clint Davis Counseling. He came on in the last year or so, and he was a former police officer, but I'll let him tell that story. So, yeah, Josh, tell us kind of your backstory. Will lead up from kind of where you're from, who you are, into policing and into biblical counseling. So you start wherever you want. Yeah.
Goodness. Okay. Well, I grew up in Fort Worth, Texas.
Okay.
My mom and dad, two brothers. My parents still live there. My brother lives in the area. One brother's deceased. Lived there till 96 when I graduated high school. Went straight into the Air Force. Did 4 years there as a policeman, air quotes.
So that's what you did in the Air Force?
Yeah, it's more like security guard for stuff.
Is that security forces? Is that what it's called?
Yeah, security forces. But there's like a security side where securing resources, and the other is like base police.
Got it.
I never did base police stuff.
Got it. So not as MP-ish as like the Army, more securing things.
Yeah, securing things.
Yeah.
If you know what I mean.
Yeah.
I did that till when I get out in around February of 2001. So I got out before 9/11, and then not immediately, but pretty shortly thereafter, hired on with a local law enforcement agency.
Gotcha.
And I think I was in my third round of the training, the on-the-job training phase when 9/11 happened.
And how old were you then?
Oh, geez. Let's see. Born in 77, probably 22, 23, young.
Okay, so young kid.
Mm-hmm.
And you went into policing because you had already done it in the military? Is that what the drive was? Like,
I didn't plan to do that in the military. I planned for something else, but they give you the old okey doke sometimes once you get in.
the recruiter's like, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, you can do this, but then they have a need. So, but I mean, I've told this story before, but the profound and noble reason I got into police work was because when I grew up, that TV show Cops was on TV.
Bad Boys, Bad Boys.
And I watched it, and I was like, that's it.
Dude, I loved Cops. My dad and I watched Cops literally all the time.
Oh, it was awesome back in the day, and it was just as ridiculous as you could probably imagine it was.
Yeah.
And I just saw that, and I was like, that's cool. Driving fast.
Chasing people,
having a shotgun in the car, and I never did have the sweet mustache, but all that stuff.
You could.
No, could not. I could try, but I saw that and I knew that's what I want to do. And so when I got out, that was. I mean, I started applying before I even got out of the military, and then when I got out, that one place is always hiring.
Yeah.
So I went just almost right from the Air Force into training.
So, how did kind of your faith play into that? Was that, did you guys have just nominal Christianity? Was that talked about? How did that play into going into policing and all that? Because I find it interesting when Christians, join the military, become a police officer, become a firefighter, go and do some high intensity thing. I'm always interested in how faith plays into that.
Back then.
Yep.
I don't know if my faith played into it at all. It was just...
so it was divorced from that idea.
Yeah. I mean, I would pray before work, but not for what you're supposed to pray for. It's very selfish prayers.
Sure.
And that there wasn't the fear about what was going to happen or any of that. I think it was just the idea of service that appealed to me.
Mm-hmm.
And then it looked fun and exciting. It was fun and exciting, but I think that's kind of what drew me to it. And a little bit of the military lifestyle kind of followed into that, just the idea of carrying a gun for a living. That's kind of what brought me into it. It wasn't anything deep that brought me there. It was just, I knew I was supposed to, the Lord made me a servant. And this was just going to be my way.
Mm-hmm.
And it was one of those things you just kind of get into. And I didn't really question it or think about it that much, what it was going to mean down the road. It was just something I knew I wanted to do, and there it was, and I jumped into it both feet.
Yeah, similar. I mean, well, I got in the Army because I couldn't pay for college, and that was okay, you meet with a recruiter and you join the National Guard and you go 2 weeks, 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks out of the year, and you'll be good. And as you were talking, I was thinking, other than Rambo movies and what I'd read in books, it was cool to be in the Army.
Right.
And then the other part was nobody was doing it. And I've always been a person that I feel like God's gone, hey, nobody's doing this, but this is a service place, and everybody should serve some. Like I had a buddy from Finland, and in Finland, every single person has to serve 2 years in the military. And I always kind of feel like, man, maybe that's a healthy, way of keeping people accountable to the overall, function of the country. Now I'm like, it's pretty traumatizing. I don't know if you want to put everybody in that situation.
Yeah, I didn't think that far ahead either. I think I can see the appeal of it, especially like locally. All you need is like a high school diploma and a driver's license, and you can get a job that has benefits and paid time off and paid sick leave. Like that, and that's kind of
for law enforcement,
right?
Yeah.
Right. I could see the appeal of that, and I was just like, yeah, that's me. I don't have to go to college. I can get this job, and I want to do it anyway. So
yeah, I mean, there's something about, for all of us that not all of us, for lots of people who join the military or policing or first responders, yeah, there's this huge world of like trauma and addiction and all those things that are there that we'll talk about in a minute.
Right.
But then there is the attractive part, which is the excitement, but we ignore all the consequences of the excitement, and then just the stability. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you feel this way, but every once in a while, like, there was something about knowing where my food was coming from, putting on the same uniform every day, not having to think about ironing and dressing up. Like being in the military or maybe first responders, like, what's expected of you, you know what the mission is generally, and you're going to do the same thing with the same people. And there's something like, I miss that some days when things are chaotic here and I'm having to make decisions, and it feels like, there's a lot more responsibility on me as a business owner to make all these things happen than just like follow orders.
Oh yeah, I have just recently, since I started doing this, that I've realized that it was the certainty of it.
Yes.
That was just that you could count on it. And then, leaving that world, being unemployed for 6 months, starting working here, the uncertainty that comes with all of that. That's super uncomfortable. Wouldn't trade it. This is much better.
Of course.
The certainty of it all was definitely, I didn't realize it then, but it was super attractive.
Yeah, that's what I meant. Exactly. Like there's days where I'm just like, man, getting deployed to Afghanistan was terrible, but it was also awesome. I couldn't leave. I couldn't blame anybody else for my problems. I wasn't responsible for a lot of it. I just had to kind of do what other people told me to do and not think about it and not push back on it. I didn't do great at that, but I did the best I could with not pushing back. And some days it's like, man, doing your own life without just being told what to do is much more complicated and ambiguous than just yes sir and doing it.
Mm-hmm.
So, all right. So you go through, you join the police department or what you're doing, and so that's 22. You said.
Yeah, about
somewhere around there. Yeah.
About.
And so you served there for how long?
When I left, it was 23 years that I was there. When I got out, that last year and a half, I was on leave. But
yeah.
When I finally left and retired, 23 years that I was there.
And what'd you do?
My primary assignment was patrol. So when folks would call the police, I would show up.
Yeah.
Me and my friends would show up.
Well, what's that like, police academy and all that stuff? It's a different time now. We could get into that, but 20 or what was that, 26 years ago, the military too. Like one of my buddies, CJ, is a recruiter, and we just talk about basic training and what drill sergeants can and can't do. And, so things have changed a lot from 2025 to, 2001.
Yeah. The academy was, it was good training. It was difficult, but I wouldn't say it was, there wasn't ever a time where I thought I can't do this. A lot of physical, they do a lot of PT in the mornings, just to make sure you really want to be there, that you're committed to it. A lot of classroom stuff, and then just what you would expect, typical firearms training, survival training, a little bit of, tactics and hand-to-hand stuff, that kind of thing. But that kind of suited me. Like I was kind of, back then, I guess, a little studious. So just the studying, taking tests, that was, and shooting wasn't that difficult. Mm-hmm. So I thrived in that. I graduated pretty well. But then there was a huge adjustment, when all of that becomes a reality of when you involve people in all of that, problem solving and decision making, that, that took an adjustment for sure. But after a while, it kind of, you get into the groove, and it definitely suited me being out there.
Yeah. What did you understand, or what was kind of addressed in mental health at that time?
0 is the number for that. We didn't. I think there might have been somewhere in one of the annual trainings where someone kind of gave like a 40, 50-minute block on a book about emotional survival for law enforcement, but it was like survival. Like how do you make sure you can keep coming back to work
Right.
and survive? There was no mention of like health, wholeness, thriving. It was just like how do we keep coming back and make sure that we're going to be okay?
Yeah.
You know, I think the standard was like to bring down the numbers of people that, you know, officers that kill themselves. Like I don't think that's a good measure for whether or not we're doing okay if we're just not killing ourselves.
Yeah.
But that was 1 year out of all of the years, and I don't remember back then anything, maybe explaining some of what you would be exposed to, but nothing to address mental health, maintaining your mental health, or even being concerned about it back then. Like it just wasn't something that we talked about.
When do you remember there being like a first conversation about that?
You mean with like my employer?
Yeah.
I think it was probably when at some point I became aware that like EAP offered counseling visits, but I think that was it. Like
What's EAP for?
EAP is the Employee Assistance Program that offers free counseling to all the employees of the city. Like you have benefits that you can access where you see a counselor and you don't have to pay for it. But that was probably somewhere in my last 5 years that I was aware, or 5 or 10 years that I was aware that existed. But that was it. Like
how can you go for 15 years without knowing that that counseling exists?
Well, I don't just think it wasn't promoted. Like
nobody talked about it.
Nobody talked about it. I don't know how long it was even there. I don't know how long it was available.
I'm assuming, in 2001, it probably wasn't even available.
Probably not. But the people that, if anyone was aware of it, they weren't really promoting it. It wasn't something that was widely talked about. For sure, not in the police department. It wasn't. And I don't even remember how I became aware. It might have been when I started teaching CIT or something.
And what is CIT?
Crisis intervention training.
Yep.
And that's when I felt like it started being promoted. And so I don't even remember how I became aware of it. It might have been probably when I started negotiating. Like I'm sure there were people on that team that were aware of it, kind of pointed it out to me, and that's when I started going. But it wasn't like the healing and wholeness that I found when I started coming here. It was just something bad would happen. I would feel like it should bother me. I would go see the counselor, sit down with him for 50 minutes, talk a little bit, check my box, and then say I went, and then I could tell other people that I went, and like that was it. There was no slow deep work like I did here at all.
Yeah. So you're a street cop, beat cop. You do that for how long?
I did that my whole career. Like that was my primary assignment the whole time I was there. Like when I left, like I was still assigned to patrol. Like my primary job was what I was doing most of the time.
And can you, as limited as you can you kind of talk about just over those years, what is it that a cop does in those moments? Because I think the average person probably doesn't really understand like what a just average patrol person does. You see them driving around, but.
If you're just talking about patrol, I mean, the department itself is there's a whole wide range of jobs, but patrol itself, it's everything that people call the police for. It's, problems with their child, problems with their spouse or girlfriend or whatever.
And you'll have usually two people in a car?
No, just, one guy.
Okay.
And most of the time, like things that require two people, like you would wait until you had to, but a lot of time it was just you'd go by yourself, or you'd be there by yourself until someone else showed up. But we were never riding like with partners.
Really?
Right. Yeah. So you were there by yourself most of the time. I mean, stuff that like, hey, I don't need to go by myself. You would wait, but most of the time you were in the car by yourself and you would just go.
Would you say even then, when you shouldn't have gone, people go anyway?
Yeah. I don't know if that's still the case, but I would not be surprised. People would just go, and there was always that sense of urgency about everything and hurry up and, I'll be fine. I don't need help.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. Or you would just go and be there and know someone was on their way and try to make sure things stayed kind of even until someone else showed up. So if you knew you were going to have to do something that you would need help with, you would just kind of talk your way around things until someone else showed up. And that was, I'd say that in general, that was the practice that we did for as long as I can remember. And then I think there was my last few years there, maybe it was after Thomas LaValle was killed. Somewhere in that time, it became
It's a police officer in
right.
Shreveport.
Right. Somewhere in that time, it became policy: 2 officers for every call. 2 officers for every call.
Okay.
I don't know how well we kept to that rule, but it was always just send 2, just send 2. So it did get better toward
In the same
end.
vehicle, or
No, we were still in separate cars. It would just wait for 2 guys to
Got
be
it.
available before they go. But that was toward the end of my career.
Yeah, and this is kind of a national pandemic, but or epidemic, but not having enough police, on the job, is that part of why there's only one person per car? Or?
I'm sure that's part of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, the agency law enforcement agency that I worked for, when I hired on, we did not have the number of officers for the department as a whole that we were supposed to have, and it was that way my entire career. Like
Right.
we never had enough.
That's
there was
what I
never
mean,
enough
yeah.
people. Yeah.
So it's like sending 2 people in one car is, spreading yourself even thinner when you already don't have enough people.
right.
Yeah.
Right. That was the problem.
So looking back, what do you think the average person hearing this, what are things that cops deal with that, that are normalized, that are just kind of part of it, that, chip away at kind of that mental and emotional health that's not even talked about?
Oh, goodness. Well, I think the biggest part of my story that I think not just the public, but I think the department, law enforcement culture as a whole, we do talk about, or we think about or consider the impact of things like having to kill someone, seeing one of your coworkers killed or hurt really bad, dead children, fatal car crashes, that kind of thing. It occurs to us that those things are super traumatic, but we don't talk about like the other violence, the violence against your mind and your soul, and just being constantly exposed to other people's suffering, like intimately involved with other people hurting. And it was simple things. You go to a call, and there would be times where I would be dealing with a child who was, the same age, context, situation as my own kid, and just that, that kid crying and all that, seeing that environment that they're in, that like you just see your own kid there, and they're just upset, hurting, sad, traumatized, just being around just people who are medically ill for a long time, just seeing them just hurting and suffering. I dealt with a lot, especially toward the end of my career, dealt with a lot of people who were mentally ill. So you're spending hours with someone who was in a full-on mental health crisis, watching just like the chaos and the turmoil and the fear and paranoia in that person, and being around that for a long time.
So vicarious trauma is...
Right,
Yeah.
right. And even just when you interview somebody about something that happened to them, whether, they got robbed, they got beat up, spouse doing something to them, you're just having them relive that. And you're right. Like then they tell you the whole story, and you're just listening to all of these terrible things that another person went through. And then even when you're done, well, you have to go write a report. So now you're reliving on paper over and over and over again. And that's just every day. Every single day of doing that for decades, and that accumulates, we just don't even know it's there, but it just accumulates, and you absorb that from people. And that was the case for me, at least, is that we weren't prepared for the mental trauma that comes, not just like having to survive and fight for your life, but all of the exposure to other people's trauma. It's just, and seeing people suffer, it adds up after a while and really gets to you.
Yeah. I just, thank you for that service and taking that on for so many people, because it's such a small percentage of people who do that stuff.
Right.
And I know it's just like when people thank me for being in the military or being deployed or whatever, or they think Memorial Day means Veterans Day or whatever, and they're like, thank you so much. Like it sucks to hear that, because you don't want to be thanked for something that's so terrible, but at the same time, we want appreciation for the job well done, so thank you.
It's very kind of you. Thanks.
Yeah, no worries. At the same time, I know we're here to learn and glean some things. So it's like, what do you think the spiritual part of that is? So, because mentally, right, we're talking about dopamine and serotonin and trauma and being exposed to things that you see and smell and sounds and all the things that give PTSD. But how do you think that, like, especially as Christians or pseudo-Christians, people who go to church and wear a cross and,
right,
said Lord's Prayer, but maybe aren't living a Christ-centered life, all the way to just non-believers, like I imagine that the seeing the worst evil and sin and brokenness and suffering, how did you deal with that or pay attention to that, or was it the same way in your view of God and in your relationship with kind of brothers and sisters in Christ? How did that go? I know hindsight, we're using a little bit of hindsight because my assumption would be you weren't thinking about any of that while it was happening. But like obviously you're living and you're a Christian and you've gone to church and you know God exists. And
I don't think I allowed those things to overlap at all back then. I guess a lot of it was just ignorant. I didn't know how bad. I didn't know how bad it was for sure. Not even until the very last day. I didn't know how bad it was, but I saw those two
bad
things.
It was in what way?
I don't know how much I was suffering. I don't know what it was doing to my soul and my mind and my body.
Okay.
Until like the crisis hit.
Yeah. So what you're saying is you join, you start seeing these things, and then you immediately start to be in survival mode and compartmentalize. And so as long as you can do that, you're sort of fine.
Oh yeah, yeah. As long as you can keep going back to work, and then get off work and kind of you think you leave it there. And you think it's not there because you don't feel it, but it's there. You're just not. And I didn't feel things till like 2 years ago, and it's always there. But I never went to like there would be one or two times someone would ask me about something. They find out you're a policeman. Oh, let me ask you about. But I never brought any of that to the Lord. I didn't take that to a Christian friend like, hey, will you pray for me? I never did any of that. And at the same time, I didn't realize it then, but I never asked the Lord to join me at work. Mm-hmm. I never said, okay, Lord, I want to follow you, show me where to go today. And it was more like, I'll be over here doing this, and if I need you, I'll let you know. Mm. That's kind of how I lived for probably until I left at lunch one day and never went back. Mm-hmm. But I never brought the Lord. I thought I was because I was going to church and being involved and taking my kids to church and taking my wife to church. But I didn't realize how far the two were apart.
When did you get married and all of that?
My wife and I married, actually this weekend was our 11th anniversary. Congrats. So we've been married for 11 years. You'll hear a lot if we keep talking, you're going to hear a lot about my wife. So we've been together for 11 years, and we have 2 children from a previous marriage. My youngest is 16, the oldest is 20.
Gotcha. So you married her kind of in the middle of this?
Right, kind of right in the middle. Like she was there like when all of the things that kind of brought me to the fall like started. It was like that's when she and I got married. We didn't know it then, but yeah, that's when she's been through it. Like
I bet
since the beginning, I kind of put her through it.
Now, did she pick up on that stuff whenever it was going on? Like as a spouse of a first responder in the beginning, was she also kind of like, well, this is just how it is? Did she notice that you were checked out and not feeling? Because obviously you're feeling. I mean, you got married, so you're like showing some emotion and some affection, and So how did that work?
She did. Like we've talked about it since then, and she noticed some of the signs early on, but she was of the mindset that like I was thinking about these things. I would pray about them. She and I would talk about them, and then I would make a decision, and she would kind of come along with me. I probably wasn't. I know I wasn't clear with her like what we were committing to. I had no idea what I was walking into, what it would ultimately do to me and our marriage and our family. But I mean, she knew what law enforcement was like, and so she kind of there were some expectations that she had that were pretty reasonable from the beginning. And then she kind of saw. I can remember like I wanted to volunteer for another team. And she said, I don't know if you need to volunteer for another team. So I think she knew back then, like I was starting to try to do too much. Mm-hmm. But I think, I don't know that she would use this word, but my daughter used the word like invincible. Like I felt invincible. I felt like none of this got to me. None of this bothered me. I could do more and more and more. Like I was built for it. It suited me. It was natural. So I had no idea. And I think toward the end, maybe the last 2 years, 5 to 2 years before she could see like it was starting to have an effect on me. She could notice me being like distant, cold, irritable, anxious, mm-hmm. The kind of thing. And those things I did see, like having social anxiety and having trouble with sleep. Like she kind of saw that happening to me and knew. But I think we were kind of managing symptoms at the time, and I had just no idea. I think neither of us had any idea how deeply that was affecting me. In the last 10 or so years was when I really started doing more and more and more, and it was more of the same, but just longer, deeper, harder work, and it eventually just broke me.
Yeah. So you're doing patrol stuff, and then you start adding more jobs. Is that what happened?
Right. They're just called additional duties. So it's not like you get paid more, or it's this, it's you stop doing one thing and start doing the other. You just add on. So probably around the 10-year mark, I got asked to be a part of the peer support team, which is the team of people that when someone's involved in a critical incident, you go to wherever they are, and just offer support, encouragement, kind of pull them aside and try to manage that incident. And there was a team of us. It wasn't just me, but it was one of those things where you're on call. So when it's your week, they can call you whenever and you just go. So that was, I pulled a guy or girl aside and, just kind of stay along with them until they were ready to go home. And then we
that shift.
Well, just until they would leave. Like, they would be involved in the incident, so they had to go get interviewed or whatever. And then usually after they were done with their part, they would be able to go home. And I would, tell them, hey, call me if you need something. And then a few days later, we would organize like a meeting where everyone involved would kind of sit down together and talk about what happened. It wasn't therapy or anything. It was just a chance for everyone to get together and talk about that incident, which is super important and very helpful for everyone to kind of tell their story and everyone can put all the pieces together. But that was just more of me and all of us, like
saturating yourself.
Sitting in a room with people while they talk about dead babies and the officer they couldn't save and, what they couldn't do with the person who got killed or, all of that stuff just over and over and over. And I wanted to do that. Like, I was anxious to do it. So if it happened and nobody called me, but I knew about it, I would just go. Just make myself available. And when I started doing that, I enjoyed it. I knew it was important. And so I just kept doing it. So
there's something in there that God was kind of using that gift of empathy and compassion and connection that you've been given, just in a really unhealthy, toxic context.
Like the gift that I see now in this work was happening back then, but I was kind of twisting it. It just, like I said, I'll be over here doing this. I know I'm good at it. If I need your help, I'll give you a call. But it was just me and my own strength, just going and doing without thinking about what I was getting into. Mm-hmm. And that was a pattern that kind of developed over the rest of my career. I just kept doing that and kept doing that.
Right. So what else did you add?
I think the next thing was negotiations, like crisis negotiation. And I mean, you've heard me talk about this. Like, there were times when it was, a bad guy in a bad place and trying to talk them into coming out so nobody has to go in and get them. There was some of that, like 2 or 3 times we did that. And every time I can remember, we were successful. Like, we got them to come out. But most of it was spending hours on the phone with somebody trying to convince them, like, not to kill themselves. Mm-hmm. And that was... that was the same thing over and over, which is us, not just me. There was a team of us putting ourselves in a position where you just on the phone with somebody for hours trying to get them from, I can think of 2 people in particular, like get them from, I'm in the bathroom with a gun in my mouth to come meet me in the yard, for just on the phone with them for hours. And then they come out and just kind of into your arms, literally sometimes. There's a lot of trying to talk people how to kill themselves. And I didn't know then either what that was like. I just had no idea what that does to you when you do that over and over and over. Mm-hmm. And there's a team of them, so I know those. That's a bunch of guys with the same thing. Yeah. I just know. We just think if nobody's shooting at you or trying to kill you in a ditch somewhere, that it's not traumatic. But that definitely was just that exposure to someone suffering over and over and over.
Mm-hmm. And then you go to dinner, right?
Yeah. Yeah, essentially. Or the worst part was sometimes you do that. I remember once just like driving home and realizing I heard on the radio what was happening. It was like a teenager in the bathroom with a rifle in his mouth. Mm-hmm. And I realized I was going to drive right by there. So I just went and I talked to this kid for a few hours and, he was a young teenager. And he finally surrendered and came out and I went and talked to him for a minute. And, 10 minutes later, I was in my living room with my wife. Mm-hmm. It's not how that should be done. That's not. I had no idea. that how bad that was. But no transition, no space between one and the other. It was just get done with this and go home and meet my wife in the living room. And I had no idea how bad that was. Like that's not how you should do that at all. And I didn't talk to anybody about, like, sit down with someone and try to process my own response or reaction to that. It was just go and do it and go home.
Yeah.
And next day, wake up and go back to work.
Okay, I know you're feeling it right now. So can you tell me a little bit about like what that is? Like as you've worked through this, like I know you've done a lot of therapy, so we're safe to kind of dive into it a little bit. But what's that about now? Like what are the tears for?
I guess that's what's funny is I guess it's because the things that I didn't feel now or didn't feel then, and it didn't feel for decades. Now that I've gone through the process of like healing and therapy, shout out to Lyle and Juanita. I feel very deeply. Praise the Lord. I feel very deeply now. Even old things, when I talk about them, I feel the things now that I didn't feel then. And even in my daily life, like my wife and my kids will tell you, like, I feel things very deeply now and back then it was just so turned off, I guess was the word. Like the switch just wasn't there because it would just add on and add on and add on and just push things down and not even acknowledge them.
Well, I think that's beautiful, and it points to the important work has been, especially doing the work so that you can feel, and that healthy isn't not ever feeling one way or the other, right? That you're so healthy that you're like logically understanding what's going on and have done all the work. So when you talk about something hard, you just don't cry because you already understand it, right? Like that's also still coping. Or the other side, which is just being so checked out and disassociated from the whole thing that there's nothing to feel, because it's so blocked off. So
yeah, it has been beautiful, the work. I mean, it's been, the term I use is like, it was brutal and beautiful. And I like the way Lyle says it because I didn't know it then, but in the middle of it, you're like, oh, this sucks. Thank you. That's what it feels like. Is that work that we did over 18 months or whatever was really beautiful and awful at the same time.
Oh, it's like doing surgery, like you're cutting stuff out and digging into things, and treating that wound hurts and makes it inflamed, and and there's still scars, but it gets better and better as we go. Yeah. Well, I appreciate you sharing that and being vulnerable about it. I know it's I know this is safe enough for us to talk about and all those kind of things. But no matter what, when we talk about our own stuff, it's heavy and it sucks and it's hard. So I appreciate you being vulnerable.
I'm happy to.
Yeah. So moving forward, so you do that kind of stuff. And at the time, right, you go from doing that to going to dinner with your wife to playing with your kids, right? You do that over and over and over again. When did the wheels start to kind of fall off?
Probably in 22. My last year was 22. And I still didn't recognize it, but it started to manifest physically. Like, probably 21, 22. It started out with, I think probably like the sleeplessness was the first thing to go. Like just, being on call or feeling like you have to always be ready.
So hypervigilance.
Yeah, just like, when you sleep, you're just not all the way asleep. You're just ready for at any moment. The phone's going to ring and you're going to be ready to go. That constant like preparedness and availability. So it's
like having a newborn baby at all times.
Yeah. Yeah. And it would take me a long time to go to sleep. If I woke up, it'd be hard to go back to sleep. When I was sleeping, it wasn't like deep, restful sleep. It was like kind of on the surface of sleeping. I remember once just laying there and I'm not going to sleep, but I feel like my whole body just sinking into the mattress. That started first, and then it was just the social anxiety. I'd go somewhere with my wife and the kid, like out to dinner. It just supposed to be a good thing, but I like so checked out, like not really present to my kids and my wife. It was like I would just sit there and feel like no one else realized how loud it was where we were, like how much was going on. I've got my youngest sitting next to me and showing me Legos, and I'm like, that's too much. I can't deal with all that. and we'd get halfway through a sit down meal and I'd be ready to go. Just like, I just want to go home and take this belt off and, put my PJs on and have a drink. And that just got one of my kids was telling me the other day, I would just be in the car and the question was always like, is something wrong? I'm just tired. But it was like, I didn't want to be around anyone, and being around people just kind of sucked all the energy out of me. Just felt super anxious doing that. So at first it was like sleeplessness, and then just not wanting to be around people. Couldn't take any stimulation outside the house, that kind of thing. It's kind of worse. But I just thought it was something wrong with everyone else. Like, you guys are just too annoying. You guys are too loud.
I'm fine.
Yeah, and I'll just, I'll take some NyQuil and go to sleep, and maybe I'll get 6 solid hours. But I obviously didn't recognize any of that as having anything to do with trauma. I just thought this is the way it is. We just think we're all like this, so it must be okay.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you say we're all, like, you mean police officers?
Yeah, law enforcement. Like, we're all just not, we don't sleep good. We don't like being around people. We're always hypervigilant. Like, it's encouraged to be hypervigilant. I didn't know. I didn't know anything outside the culture that I was in, and there was no outside voices speaking into that at the time. So I had no idea. But that's kind of how the wheels were falling off. But it was those like little signs that point. You just ignore them. Yeah. If I had paid attention then, I'd have thought, maybe I'm not doing good. I may talk to somebody about this.
So then what happened?
Ooh. I think the last thing, when it really started to come apart.
Because you were doing CIT at that point too, right?
That was the thing that really, I think, that was what made, like, when it really got deep and hard. And because I was teaching CIT.
Which is for what? For the...
So there was a team of us that were teaching other first responders in the local area. So police officers, firefighters, LSU police, that kind of thing. They would come.
And I came to a couple of those. Did I meet you at one of those?
You came and taught. You came and taught a block for us, and you watched me teach ACEs.
That's right.
That day.
That's right.
Yeah. That's kind of how we connected.
That's right.
Through all of that.
I was thinking about that this morning. I was like, I think that's the first time we met, somewhere around there.
Yeah, I think we met. I think we had spoken once before that, and then a couple of people that were on staff for us had come to teach blocks for us, adolescents or whatever.
Yeah.
Teach blocks for the course.
You mean staff for Clint Davis Counseling?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, people from CDC would come and teach, and then I reached out to you to come teach a block, and you sat on the community panel.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, so like that, I think you took half a day, just came and spent the day with us. And so a team of us were teaching that, so teaching first responders how to effectively communicate with a person in a mental health crisis. Mm-hmm. And then kind of sprinkled in there was, I think, maybe 2 blocks on wellness, like officer wellness, like teaching us how to take better care of ourselves. I ironically taught that one a lot. If you can't teach.
Yeah, that's right.
But that was really good. But it was one of those things, like, I saw the need for it. Like, I saw the need for us, law enforcement, to do a better job communicating with any person in a crisis, or communicating in general with each other, with our spouses. So the idea of helping us all become more effective communicators I loved it. So I jumped into that, and then when I would go to the street, I would, made myself like the Yoda advocate of all of those things. So I was constantly trying to get everyone to like embrace this thing, trying to get more resources for us for mental health, trying to talk to the other guys at work about, hey man, maybe you should go talk to somebody, maybe you should sit down. And I jumped into that with both feet, and I got super deep into it, always trying to teach. And then I would, go to work, and without bragging, I can say that there were people who kind of knew me in that role. So if they needed help or they wanted somebody to go with them, they'd call me to go with them. And then I had the negotiation background, so it was always like, hey, will you come with me? Hey, will you? And of course I would do it. And I started doing, I felt like I was doing more emergency commitments, like 2 or 3 a week, taking someone, because I had that background. I would just want to go. And so that's more time spending with someone who's in a mental health crisis. And then you got to take them to Oshner to get RPC'd, and sit with someone in the wing of the hospital that's for mentally ill people, and you're just surrounded by mentally ill people. So I was just more enmeshed in that culture, doing that work, and then teaching it, for 40 hours 1 or 2 weeks a month. And that's when I really started to get so deep into it. And the effects were getting worse. I started having like these weird like pains around my abdomen and back, just like hot spots under my skin. The sleeplessness got worse, and just from the constant exposure. And that's what I was doing like the last day of work. I was at that course the last day that I was there, and it's when it really broke. It got bad toward the end. I think the thing that what really I left in September, and like in August, right before that, there was an incident that happened that I think that was the last straw. The one that we talked about where there was a woman that got stabbed. And I was like the third or fourth or fifth person there. But she was in her home and nobody knew she was in there. And then they figured it out. And these two guys that I work with, shout out to Mike and Mike, they saved her life. They kicked her door in and went in and found her. And she had been stabbed and was bleeding to death. And so we all had the training for using clotting agents and tourniquets and chest seals and all that. And so I went in there and found where she was bleeding, and I tried to stop the bleeding with the quick clot, but she was bleeding so I couldn't stop. I couldn't make it stop. And I just got covered in her blood, like from the elbows down, just covered in her blood. And like we always do, like I went to the outside spigot, turned it on, washed my hands, went to the hospital for the exposure thing, and then wrote my report and went home. And after that, it's when like the physical symptoms really they started to get worse and worse and worse, where I had I would be letting the dog out to pee, and I just felt like I had to all the time, and my vision would always want to be going like this, and I'm trying to go like this. And just trying to, I couldn't focus.
Tunnel vision.
Yeah. The pain got much worse around my. And I remember sitting in that class, and I felt like I had a knot in my chest, and like I felt like I just needed to sit up taller because it was just like this pulling sensation in my chest, and I felt super like fatigued, just like in my face and my body. I felt that weariness that like Jesus talks about. That's what it was. It was just weary. And I felt terrible, and I made an appointment with my doctor for the next day, and I went home at lunch, September 22nd, I think, and that was my last day. I never went back. I didn't know it then, but I never went back.
And so what was the in-between time?
Ooh.
I know it's a lot to get into. But.
Yeah, but no, I want to. So I drove home. I don't even know how I drove home. I was talking to my oldest on the way home, and she said, "Dad, are you okay? You sound tired." And I said, "Yeah, baby, I'm just tired." And I went home, and I laid on my bed in our house, and I'm laying there staring at the ceiling and crying. And my wife came home, and I had told her, I'd been texting with her, about how I was feeling, and she's like, "No, go home, go to the doctor. Go home and go to the doctor." And so I went home, and she came home, and I told her like what was going on and how I was feeling, and she had been with me, like she knew all the physical stuff that was going on. And I just laid on the bed, and I told her what was going on. And my wife is, in her sweet way, she's just the sweetest woman. She said, "Can I tell you what I think?" I couldn't even answer. I just nodded my head. I'm telling you, I told everyone this. That woman opened her mouth, and God spoke. She said, "You are too available." That was it. And when she said it, I knew. I could feel something break, and I knew. And she was right. She said, "You're available to everyone all the time for anything that they need." And she was right. And I just felt something just break, and I knew, And I said, "You're right." And I think I sent a text to the supervisor over the negotiations and the CIT. I had already quit peer team, and I said, "Look, I can't do this. I need to be off the team. I can't do it." And so we went to church that night, and that's kind of like, that was when it started, like me getting back to like not doing all of these things. Everything that I was doing, I walked away from right then and never went back. Saw my doctor the next day, and I'd been to see him after the lady got stabbed, and he told me like there's really no medical.
And this is like a primary physician.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, my primary care physician, and he had seen me with the lady when the lady got stabbed, and he recognized it. He goes, "You just need rest," and so he sent me home, and so I went back, and I mean, I'm sure he looked at me and knew, like he could just see, and so he asked me some questions, and I kind of talked to him, and I mean, I'm sure I was crying when I was telling him, and he just looked at me.
And had you cried before?
Yeah, but it was like the letting the steam out of the pot cry. But that was it.
Yeah.
Nothing deep. It was just like I'm crying because this terrible thing happened, and then I was fine. So I sat down with him, and he just looked at me and he said, "I can't find any medical reason for this, and I'm going to give you some time off." And he just said, "You need a psych consult."
Mm-hmm.
And I looked at the floor and I started crying. I'm a crier. So I called the EAP guy that I had been seeing, and it was like a month or two before they had any space because, they're overwhelmed. So since I knew you and we had worked together, and so I called the office, and she set me up with Lyle, and I think I started seeing him the next day.
Mm-hmm.
And every week thereafter for probably 8 or 9 months of just going to him. And at first it was just like, let's get you down on a crisis. So it was just rest, and sitting down with him and processing. And that's when I kind of started to get into the Word a little bit more. Joined a couple of small groups with men from my church.
Yeah, so Lyle is a biblical counselor at our
Right.
practice, who's also trained in trauma and addiction and, all the things we talk about outside of, a master's degree with that stuff. So you're seeing him for biblical counseling. He's helping you with soul care and working on the issues and trying to get you to take care of yourself. And then talk about how biblical counseling kind of moved into clinical with referring, going to Lanita and doing some work there.
Okay. So that was like 8 or 9 months of Lyle and I just going through, like, me getting accustomed to the therapeutic process. Like, this is what this is like. There's what you need to do. I'd meet with him, and then during the week, just doing the hard work that comes between the sessions. There was some behavior modifications because I was just doing things.
Well, of course.
I had to learn to put my phone down, or take a walk, without my phone, not be available. Teach myself to rest. There was a lot of that, and there was just me talking through the incidents, the trauma, and like him helping me see, like, you see what this did to you. Like, I didn't know, so him helping me learn to sit with my own emotions and let myself feel things I didn't feel at the time. Months and months of that. And then, in his wisdom, there was a point where we said, I think we've gone as far as we can right now with this, but I think you need EMDR. So he referred me to Lanita, and I started seeing her.
And Lanita's a licensed social worker at our practice.
Yeah. EMDR provider. Mm-hmm. And so I started seeing Lanita, and Lyle was right. There were things that I just I didn't see the dots connect. Mm-hmm. And then I would go sit down with Lanita, and a lot less talking, just sitting there with those little devices in my hand, and I would tell her about something, and then I would just sit with it. I never sat with things before. Mm-hmm. I'm sure you can explain better, like the clinical side of it, but I describe it as like little 50-minute miracles. Like, I would just sit down, and it was like my brain would get unlocked. Mm-hmm. And I would just feel these things. Like, I remember as soon as I sat down, within seconds, the tears just coming, and just feeling these deep, like the loss, the chaos, the fear, the anxiety, the hopelessness, the suffering, like just letting it, but like in a safe way. Like the emotion, like I would feel the emotion instead of it just blowing out everywhere. Like I could feel it coming up, mm-hmm. and then it would come out. And then I would go home, and I just kind of sit. She'd tell me, go home. She'd always say, just be kind to yourself. Mm-hmm. So I would go home, and I would, drink water, be kind to yourself. So go home and drink water, and I would sit. And I remember just going sit next to my wife, and the emotions would just come, mm-hmm. and I just let them. I just cry, and she would, sit with me and let me talk if I needed to. And Lanita and I did that for months, just letting things come up and out. And like that process, like that months with Lyle and months with Lanita, that process was just really revealing, like how bad it was, and then healing at the same time, because we worked through how, like, okay, how do we do better? Like, what do we keep doing? What are we doing between the sessions? You know, that kind of thing. And it was like miracles every time walking in there with her. It was good stuff.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And so through that, you know, what was the Lord teaching you, and how did that transition into you going, oh, I want to do this same thing for other people?
I think one, learning like that it was okay to think of myself was a big deal. And then learning that I'm not everyone's savior. You know, I went from like,
Or anybody's.
I'm not anyone's savior, not even my own. But because that's kind of how what it turned into. Like, it was first I was like there to serve people, and then it was like I'm kind of the safe place, and then it was like I went from the safe place to the savior. So I felt like I was. We really unpacked that a lot, just kind of things from my childhood, like family of origin type stuff that I had decided, I had believed that lie from being very young, that you're responsible for everyone. No one's coming to help you, not even God. And I carried that into the work. Like, I would take responsibility for everyone. I didn't need help. If you asked me, like, no, I'm good, I don't need help, I would manage everything and everyone and their emotions, and I would take them alongside me when it was not mine to do. So learning that I wasn't everyone's savior, that was a big deal. And working through that process of like just like actually being whole and allowing myself to feel emotions, deep emotions, you know, not being available to everyone, even my kids. Like, sometimes it's sound, if you call me, I might not answer, you know, I'll call you back. A lot of that, just learning to not have to be available, that I don't have to help everyone. The Lord showing me over and over, like, if you just give me a second, I'll take care of this. Like, you don't have to. Or if you just wait and watch, like, it will get done without you, and it will be okay. Somehow, you know, the church will keep having service on Sunday if you don't volunteer. Somehow your kids are going to be all right if you don't answer the phone every time they call. Somehow the workplace is going to survive without you being there. You know, the Lord, like, letting me see, or even seeing that sometimes things are just not going to get done, and you're not responsible for that. Or they may not get done the same way you would do them, and you're not responsible for that. Like, the Lord teaching me to just trust Him with all of those things. You know, my wife, my kids, my family, my marriage, my health, all of that. Like, Him teaching me how to trust Him with that over the months and the months of just letting go of believing that lie, that I was responsible for everyone else, and that I could trust Him. That was what took for months and months of doing that work.
And so what then transitioned that into, oh, maybe I could be a biblical counselor?
I was sitting with Lyle one day, and I remember I had no idea that he didn't have a degree, and I was like, oh wait, I can do this, and I don't have to have a degree. I didn't know, and that's kind of where the idea entered my mind. But for probably the first year I was on leave, like, I was trying to go back. Let me get better so I can go back. And looking back now, I can see the Lord was like, no, you're not going back. No, you're done. No, you don't have to do that anymore. But I didn't recognize it. And my wife and I were traveling one day, and we stopped into McAllister's, and there was just some guy over there on the laptop with the, you know, the screen up, and I can hear his computer, and some guy over there on speaker, and the lady behind the counter asking me questions, and there's music playing. And like, I think I placed my order and walked out, and was just so dysregulated, so overwhelmed just by being in there. And we sat down to eat the big spud, and I'm just crying. I looked at her and I said, what if I can't go back? And that's where I started to realize I can't handle ordering a sandwich. Maybe I don't need to go back. And so that's kind of where it started, of like thinking, I don't think I can do this anymore. And then both Lyle and Lita, I remember them asking me, like, if you can't do this, what do you want to do? And I told them both, I want the Lord to use me to do for other people what you guys have done for me. And that's like where it started to think, well, maybe I can. Yeah. Maybe I can have a marketable skill instead of just police work. So we started kind of talking through that process. And then the last 6 months before I went on leave was when I realized, like, I'm not going back. And that's when you and I met. Somewhere in there is where you and I met. and just talked about the idea of like, if I want to do this, what do I need to do? And we had that conversation and talked about me getting a certification. And in there is when it was like, okay, I'm obviously, the Lord made it very clear to me. Like when my employer said, you can't come back, that was the Lord saying, no, son, you don't have to do this anymore. Mm-hmm. And I finally entertained the idea of walking away and doing something else. And this was it. Mm-hmm. And he answered my prayer for sure.
Yeah.
Of getting me out of that and calling me out of that darkness and into this light. Mm-hmm. For sure. Was somewhere in that last 6 months.
And how have you seen that be, since you've been here and doing the work and
well, the first time was when I sat down with my first client. So there were 6 months between when I had my last paycheck from law enforcement and when I started working here. So I didn't have anything for 6 months, and then I came back, and I wanted to retire on the 15th and start working on the 16th and seeing clients all day every day. But for 6 months, I'd have been my old self, I would have just said yes immediately and let you do that. Yeah, but like that sanctification process, mm-hmm. Would have been short circuited.
Yeah,
there's 6 months of me saying, Lord, you told me to do this, but I'm not doing anything. I'm out there mowing yards again. But that was him preparing me for like, you need to trust me with this. You need to trust me with this. And so I started like September 15th, and September 15th was the day that you and I said I start work. And so I did. And so September 16th, I want eight clients all day long. I did not see a single client for 6 days.
Yeah.
And I came in and saw, and when I had my first client, it was one guy.
Yeah.
And I went home that night, and I'm looking at my a simple practice calendar. I remember looking, and I scroll back a year, and I asked my wife, I said, babe, that last day that when I came home from work and never went back, was that a Wednesday? She goes, yeah, I remember, because we went to church that night, and everyone prayed for you. That was 2 years exactly.
Wow.
From the day that I left to my first client. 2 years to the day.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That's
Sat
awesome.
down with that guy 2 years exactly. And so then I was like, okay, Lord, I see what you're doing here. You're really just showing off. And so I knew that he was, that was him telling me, like, I promise, mm-hmm. I got you. And this is what you're going to do. And he was very clear, like somewhere in the middle, I remember him being very clear with me, like, you're going to do this, but it's not going to be what you think it's going to be. Mm-hmm. It's not going to look the way you think it is. So that was the first thing.
I don't need you to save everybody in 1 week.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm not going to, and we prayed like, Lord, send me who you want me to have.
Yeah.
And man, he has.
Yeah.
That was the first, like for sure that first day I was like, oh, okay. Like, and that wasn't until after I saw the client.
Right.
I didn't walk in knowing, oh, today's the day. And then I remember, I think since then there have been several times where I remember very often, one of the worst things I remember from police work was that the way that you hear a person, it's not even crying, like when they find out that their loved one is dead. Mm-hmm. And we've all heard that, law enforcement guys heard that repeatedly. Like that was like, I could close my eyes and hear it in my head. And I remember hearing that and having to like heal from that and not have that like enmeshment with that scene and those people. And then I remember watching the Chosen series, mm-hmm. in that first episode when he calls Mary, and like when he heals her, and like he puts his hands on her, and she like puts his head in her chest, and she's crying. But it's that like the cry that you hear somebody do when they're healing, mm-hmm. like when it's finally coming, and like they feel the freedom and they feel it let go. And I heard myself do that, and I remember like wanting, like, Lord, I want, instead of hearing it from the workplace, mm-hmm. I want to hear it in this room healing. Mm-hmm. And I've heard it mm-hmm. since then a few times with the client, and it's beautiful. Like, and I know that it's for them, obviously it's for them, like, to find healing in the room, but it's the Lord reminding me, like, yeah, I heard you. Like, mm-hmm. I'm with, and I'm with you now. It's not just me walking into the room. Like, I know I know every time I sat down with Lyle, it was 3 of us in the room.
Mm-hmm.
Every time I sat down with Lanita, it was 3 of us in the room. And now when I sit in that room, I know there's 3 of us in there.
Mm-hmm.
It's me and the client and the Holy Spirit every single time. And he's just in little details that will come along. You know, a guy will come and sit down with me, and like when he starts talking, I'm like, oh, okay, Lord, yeah. Like I can see the Lord for years just preparing me to do that work with the experience. It's not like the pain, but the healing that comes out of it. Mm-hmm. Like I know he was setting me up to sit down with that guy or that woman or that couple when they start telling their story. I'm like, okay, Lord, I see. Like, and he answered our prayer. Like he sent me who he wants me to have for sure.
That's good, man.
Yeah.
Well, I'm proud of you, and I'm super thankful for you being here, and that the Lord, you know, would deem any of us worthy of doing this work with people. But I know you're doing a great job, and I think it's also fun to be a part of a team. You know, and we didn't talk about that a whole lot, but I think maybe you could speak to coming from the police force and maybe expectations of what a team doing this looks like, or maybe even a church doing this, to trying to do this as a team, as biblical counselors and clinicians, and working together and referring back and forth. So we're being ethical and we're following the rules and helping people rightly. You've been here, 7-8 months now. How's that been?
Well, obviously the workplace is totally different. A whole building full of cops is different than a whole building full of, counselors and therapists, people who are, on their by themselves, before they come to work, whole and healthy for the most part, with, other people who are just as broken and hurting as you and they don't know it. That's been a big difference. So just coming to a place where I think almost maybe every CPC, or maybe almost every CPC, like at some point since I've been here, has either like pulled me aside and said, hey, let me talk to you for a second. Or I've asked like, hey, do you want to get coffee? Do you want to have lunch together? And just having other men, counterparts in the workplace, just, sit down with me, listen to me. We talk about, our struggles or what we're dealing with, or just stop and pray over me, that kind of thing. Being able to have a conversation with my boss about, hey, this is what I'm struggling with. And, we had that conversation where, like I said, hey, I know you don't know this about me, but here's how this feels. And you're like, oh, I didn't know that, but I'm glad you told me. Like being able to have that kind of healthy conversation has been completely different. And I walked in different, when we found the room, the office that I use now, we had my wife and my in-laws and two couples from church. Like they came with me and prayed in the room over me and my wife, and knowing that I have help and I can ask for help and I can accept help, and then absolutely, like I think the word for it, like when we talk about, my wife and I talk about work, we consider it a ministry, and so I know, like, she knows when I'm in with a client, and she'll pray for me or for the client. When she knows I'm going to work, she'll pray for me or for the client. And having her beside me, knowing that like we're that close and she's beside me for the work, and then that, I just can't say enough about like that 18 months, like that little precious woman went to war beside me and on my behalf for months. And like what that built, the intimacy that builds into a marriage, and then being able to carry that over into like, I know I'm going to work and I know she's praying. I know she's beside me. I know that, when I have less clients this week than last week, like she's like, no, we're going to be okay. Lord's going to take care of us. Having someone so close and intimate beside me, and then knowing I can come here, and if there's an issue or a really hard client, I mean, probably in the first week, I went to the CPC meeting. I was like, this really triggered me, and being able to go to other men that are in the same workplace, and do the same work and say, like, I'm not okay. And then someone sit down with me for an hour, just let me process and talk. I don't know how I couldn't do it any other way. I did for a long time. It obviously didn't work. So having that here is life-changing.
Good,
absolutely.
Man. I'm glad.
Thank you.
Any closing thoughts, comments?
I just want to say how grateful I am, to the Lord, to my family, to my wife, and to you, that I'm here, having a place like this, and to the other men and women, like just the idea of that, like you can reach out for help, you can accept help, and it's not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of courage and strength to say, like, I am not okay. Like that, the vulnerable humility it takes to be able to say, like, I'm not okay. I need help. I need to sit down with somebody. I can't do this anymore. I'm broken. Like that's the same. It's courage. It's a different kind of courage, but it's courage. I don't want anyone to end up where I was. I know a lot of guys are already there. A lot of guys and girls are already there, but, I mean, if they're listening, I'd reach out to help first. And, it doesn't have to be me or us, just somewhere to say, I'm not okay. I need help. It's a big deal.
It's good, man. Well, I appreciate your vulnerability and your story. And, you and I have talked about it, and I've heard even more details than what you're sharing today. But I appreciate the fact that, it's such a, like you said with clients, I think it's this cycle of we're all broken. We're all in need of a savior, and boasting in our testimony is such a important thing, to tell people what God has done and what God is doing. And at the same time, there's always haters, and there's always somebody who's going to listen and go, oh, this is therapy crap, or, biblical counseling, or there's psychologists who are, this or that. There's always someone to question or push back or, whatever. And I just love that. I think you're a guy who you've already stepped up in speaking. You've, gone back in the CIT stuff from a, actual therapist perspective. And that's really cool. I know it's nerve wracking and overwhelming and, all this stuff, but, you've been jumping in with both feet but in a healthy way,
right?
And in a way that, you don't feel like you have to. And that's what's also part of a team of people going, hey, you don't have to, like, we'll do it. Somebody's going to do it. It doesn't have to be you, And so just know that's always the case for me and you. Like, you don't have to do anything, and, you get to do things, but if you don't want to, like, I don't care.
Yeah.
I mean, I want everybody to do what they feel like God is calling them to do. And, my job is to keep loving on you and supporting you and shaping you and vice versa.
Yeah.
So our meetings are always good for me. And even this is great for me to hear it, because just like, those clients, people listen to this, like, you guys, you can have all of this too. Like, you can have community, you can have connection, you can have healing. And whether you're in a space where, you just feel like I'm alone and I'm isolated, like there's somebody around you, somebody out there, God is weaving something together, but you have to take that step of faith, and you're not going to have it all together. You're not going to know all the answers. But he is weaving and doing things for your good. And the things in our life that we think are the worst things ever and that crush us and kill us, like, he literally makes beauty from ashes.
Absolutely.
And just to remind everybody, like, that's my story, that's Josh's story, that's everybody's story if we let it be.
Yeah.
And if we participate in this thing that God's doing, and then we take that very specific pain and suffering that gets turned to peace, and then we use it to be able to remind other people and encourage other people. And we're not just doing it from a textbook or an intellectual property or a sermon that we heard, but from an actual lived, embodied way of doing this thing. And I think that's what Jesus is trying to teach us, is not just to hear about him and talk about him, but to embody him in a way, imperfectly, however imperfectly so, that when people see it, they see Christ in us, they see the body of Christ, the church, come together. There's only one or two responses. It's to flee from it and reject it, or to go, man, this is what I've been missing.
Yeah. That's been my experience, definitely. Just watching him redeem all of those things, the way the scripture says, like, I'm making all things new. It's not a new thing. I'm going to take this thing and I'm going to make it new. And I know we watched that happen, going back and teaching the very class that I was teaching, like my last day of work. That's the Lord just redeeming all that and being able to go back from a position of health and wholeness and healing and speak to the same people in the same classes. The Lord's showing me, like, if you will just obey and let me worry about outcomes, you will see. It might take 2 years, but
sure,
if you'll just obey and not worry about outcomes, he's going to take care of it and take care of me, and he did.
The Lord is slow, but not like we think,
Right.
I mean, we want our plans and our agendas, and he's like, dude, if I gave you what you wanted, it wouldn't be good for you.
Yeah.
We got to constantly remind each other of that, because there's good things and then there's God things, and it's hard to tell the difference.
The things that I was doing were good things, but I was doing them all on my own. And I thought, well, if someone asked me to do something and it's good, that means I should say yes. And I always said yes, but they were good things. But the Lord, the Lord's very clear, like, you need to put that down. It's killing you. And so I put down those good things, and then now, like, the good things are completely different. And it's Him handing me to them slowly, instead of like the way I would do it, or just another thing, another thing, another thing.
Yeah,
I'm really grateful.
It's awesome, man.
Yeah.
I'm going to pray and wrap us up. God, I just pray for the first responders and spouses that are listening to this or that are connected to first responders. God, I just pray that you give them a sense of peace this week, a sense of comfort. God, that you rip the scales off their eyes and open their ears, open their hearts to healing and to the opportunity for healing. That if there's something that's buffering and keeping them from and blocking them from reaching out to a counselor or to a pastor or to their spouse, God, I just pray that you will shatter that you will remove that. We rebuke Satan in that. We rebuke the spiritual warfare that's going on for their hearts and their minds, and the lies that have been told even before becoming a first responder, God. We know that those lies are there from childhood and from family systems. And so we just ask you in the name of Jesus to remove those things and bring healing. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thanks, man. God bless you guys. Have a good week.